back to the Nexus Podcast. My guest today is Florence Hudson. Florence is the working group chair of the IEEE UL 2933 standard and framework for clinical IoT data and device interoperability with T.I.P.S. The T.I.P.S. approach is rooted in trust, identity, privacy, protection, safety, and security. That's what all those letters stand for. And we're going to talk about all of this with Florence. She's got an impressive resume. She's the founder and CEO of FD Hint, which is a consultancy specializing in advanced technologies innovation. She's also the executive director of the Northeast Big Data Innovation Hub at Columbia University, among many other noteworthy accomplishments. We're going to talk primarily about the IEEE 2933 standard and what it means for improvements to the security of connected healthcare devices, the improvement and protection of patient safety, and a lot more. So I'm excited Florence is here. So let's get the episode going. How are you? Thank you so much for making the time today. I appreciate it.
Oh, thank you, Michael. I'm really excited about this. I love talking about T.I.P.S. It's a very mission-based effort. We're trying to keep the humans, the data, and the devices safe. And that's, an ongoing challenge, and it'll probably become more challenging over time,
Right.
with all the cybersecurity challenges that we have. So thank you for having me.
Tell the listeners about a little bit about the working group that you chair. And I know the standard was published in September of last year. What's been happening since then with the standard?
Well, it's really cool. We started this whole effort in 2015, to give you a feel for how long it takes to develop some of these standards. So don't give up if you're getting started on one. I was actually at a Cisco IoT World Forum Steering Committee meeting, and another guy and I started talking about how nobody was worried about end-to-end trust and security in this highly connected world with all these Internet of Things devices. And we said, okay, nobody else is worrying about it. Let's worry about it. So we actually had a workshop that was sponsored by IEEE and with some funding from the National Science Foundation in 2016 at George Washington University in DC. And we invited the agencies and, DOE and NSF and DOD and all these folks. And we started talking about the challenges and all the places that we have to worry about this, connected vehicles, supply chain, water systems, smart grids, healthcare. And then we looked and said, well, you know what, let's do healthcare first. Because if you hack an implanted medical device, you could rather immediately kill a human. So that has an immediate value proposition. And then our vision was to bring T.I.P.S. across all the cyber physical systems. So we did some initial work and then started the working group in 2019. And then after you publish the standard, you're not allowed to be a working group anymore. But we missed each other so much because we had a great time working together. We actually had over 300 people around the planet that joined the working group. And wow. I know, and 184 that are actually listed in the standard because they were involved enough to be a voting member of the standard. And it's really amazing. And people would say, how'd you get so many people? I said, it's interesting because when you start a standard effort with IEEE, they ask you, how many people will be involved in this standard? And I said, I don't know, like 20 or 25 if I invite my best geek friends. And there were over 300 because every time we talked about it, like at DEF CON or HIMSS or wherever, and some of you probably know some of these conferences and some of the humans that go to them and say, we're looking at the whole picture. We're looking at trust and identity, which some people call identity and access management, privacy issues, which are different the privacy issues are the same, but the governance is different in all the jurisdictions, protection, safety, and security, the whole thing. They look at us and go, wow, nobody else is worrying about this. I'm glad you are. We're like, great, we'll join the crowd. And that's what happened. And so we had over 300 people from 32 countries and 6 continents, believe it or not. And so we got through the process and gave birth to the standard, so to speak, in September 2024. And we did it together with UL and now Underwriters Laboratories. And now what we've done is we've transitioned the working group because you can't work on a standard after it's actually published. No more work to be done. So we evolved the working group to be a T.I.P.S. roadmap task group. And what we're doing is spawning new standard ideas to apply T.I.P.S. in new areas, which is really fun.
There's a lot of application for for these concepts across the board in security. That's
Yeah, I'm
exciting.
so happy to hear you say that. I love when other people say that, and actually, we were very fortunate that we won the IEEE Emerging Technology Award, and they gave it to us in December. And I was telling one of the head IEEE guys about it, and he said, there can be hundreds of these TIP standards. And I said, oh, I'm so glad to hear you say that. And NIST actually asked us if we could apply it across all the cyber physical systems, and that's actually our goal.
Mhm.
So we'll have to do it. I like to do it one at a time because what we want is subject matter experts in the domain. So we have cybersecurity people, but like for the clinical Internet of Things one, 2933, we had, CISOs from hospital systems, and we had people from Cerner and NIH and, and cybersecurity medical device people and Medtronic and all these, Draeger. So we want subject matter experts in that domain so they know where the vulnerabilities are. They know what keeps them up at night, and then we address it in the standard. So we want to do the same thing in the new
Right.
domain areas.
And so tell me, before we get into the standard itself, why does it make sense to go with IEEE as a partner in Underwriters Lab? I mean, I hear them and I think, well, maybe there's some sort of certification coming down the line for
Mm-hmm.
the security of medical devices, something like that. Is that an intent? Is that a goal?
Yeah, so that's an opportunity. So I'll give you the genesis of this. So, I went to an IEEE meeting actually and was talking about this, and they said, wow, you should do a pre-standards working group. I'm like, what's that? Because I'm an AIAA girl. I'm an aerospace engineer by training. I wasn't really an IEEE.
Hmm.
Now I'm an IEEE chick. Um, and we started with them because it's a IEEE. It is a global standard. It's based in the US where I happen to be. And they do have, over 400,000 volunteers around the planet, people who really care, very mission based, So we started with IEEE, and they were very supportive of us. And the UL part comes from a funny story. So when I was a little girl, being a geek, I used to crawl around looking for the UL tag on the electric cords because I knew that meant it was safer. I think I saw a movie where like somebody threw a blow dryer into a tub and somebody died. I'm like, oh my gosh, how can that happen? And then I was looking at what are some things that can make it maybe safer. The way you use it can make it safe or unsafe. But what are some of the things that they assess in a technology? And the UL tag was what I knew when I was a little kid. So I was like, well, let's do this with UL, And so we created an MOU with them, and then published it the same day. And UL, as you say, is known for conformity assessment and compliance and things like that. And so we have been talking to IEEE and UL about having that type of capability. So we're looking into that. And what we're also doing is creating a maturity model. So I don't know if you've ever seen some of the HIMSS maturity models, the Healthcare Information Management System Society, or there's a smart grid maturity model that was created like 20 years ago by like
Hmm.
Carnegie Mellon, and they're out there and you can look at them. And the idea is that we want people to look at it and say, okay, where am I now and how can I get better? And what are the most important places for me to get better? And so, that's what we've been doing. But we started with IEEE and added UL for those reasons. They were very supportive. We really believe in the branding, of what they deliver as a standard from IEEE. And then for as you said, the conformity and things like that from the UL side. And
Right.
IEEE actually has those capabilities now too. So,
Hmm.
so that's why, we got involved with them. And now as we move forward, we're thinking about how we can get that done. And honestly, there's a cost to creating a conformity assessment program, which I had no idea. So when there's an IEEE working group, we do it at the individual, not the entity level, meaning it doesn't your company that's joining. It's any smart individual who cares can join this effort, this working group. But then to have an assessment plan, you have to pay, I don't know, tens of thousands of dollars. And we're like, we're all volunteers. We don't have any money, so we're not sure how we're going to do that yet, to be honest with you. So we're starting to talk to some industry players that might be interested in helping, to help with that. But then they're sensitive about, not making it look a certain way. So we're still working through all that,
Yeah.
because it needs to be open. I specifically branded TIPS with IEEE, so no company could say this is mine. It's not meant to be, proprietary. It's meant to be for everything and everybody to keep everybody safe. So that's the reason that, we worked with IEEE.
Yeah.
And now, we're going to keep moving it forward. And our real vision is that, since you're cybersecurity folks, a lot of you know CIA, confidentiality, integrity, and availability, which was really created. I started like in DoD land when I was an aerospace engineer, and I worked on Navy aircraft and stuff and things like that. And CIA was really created from like the nation state and enterprise level. T.I.P.S is really about all these devices all over the place, and humans and, vehicles and medical devices and sensors and NFC on your kid's bicycle helmet, all sorts of stuff out there, right? And we need some type of framework that helps us make all that safer.
I guess it indicates a certain level of maturity that we're at this point where we need to talk about standards and kind of wrangle in all these devices and the data that they're producing and the exposures within them as well.
Totally agree with you. Yeah, when we present this, we often talk about, I haven't met her yet, but I really should call her, Dr. Suzanne Schwartz at the FDA. And she says, anything that's connected, there's a risk. And, some people, God bless them, they have medical devices at home, and then grandma has this device next to her bed, and the doctor communicates with that, and then that communicates with her pacemaker or whatever. People think, oh, if I'm at home, I'm safe. And we're like, oh, the opposite, And,
Right.
and so one of the opportunities and challenges we think about too is how to educate the humans about this. So we're the technologists, the geeks that put the standards together, and then the providers, the doctors, the nurses need to learn about it, which is why we presented at HIMSS. And then the patients, we actually envisioned making a portal that patients and like that little girl who was looking for the UL tag when I was little, the story I tell the team is that, so someday, hopefully it's a couple of years from now when it takes a while for standard to be fully deployed, design in, and then all the way through execution. So there'll be a little girl at the doctor with her grandma, and the doctor's going to try to give one of them an insulin pump. And the little girl's going to look at the doctor and say, does it have T.I.P.S? That's what we want. We want human demand. We want them to know, like I knew the UL sticker meant something was safer. We want them to know that T.I.P.S means that it could be safer for them.
So let's talk about the standard and some of the areas that are prioritized in it. I mean, I know there was a lot of focus in there about secure development practices, for example, and tell me about what the standard emphasizes to reduce risk to software, firmware, hardware, all the components that go into these devices.
Well, we start with trust and identity because that's what gets access to a device, right? So that's the tip of the arrow. So that's the identity and access management piece. And so that is not just like the MFA that you do like to get into your bank, the multi-factor authentication at a software level. It's like, are the devices checking each other out too? Is somebody worrying about all this stuff? Has somebody checked if the device actually has real components in it? Has anybody worried about this? What if the device goes offline? Like, is somebody, it used to be years ago when we were first putting computers into retail as compared to the old, cash registers. Everyone was like, oh my gosh, what happens if, the internet goes down? We're like, well, you better figure that out, right? So for a medical device or system, that's a big issue. So beyond trust and identity, there's privacy, but then protection and safety in those situations, and then security. So we talk about everything from like, a trusted compute module all the way down to like the IP of the design of the chip. And then the software, firmware updates, firmware over the air. What if it gets, compromised? And then all the way to the service, like I said, who's connecting to grandma's device, next to her bed. So all those pieces are in there. And what's important is that all of the elements are there. We don't tell them exactly how to do it, except for like, key pairs here and encryption that. We give them ideas of how they can do it, but not like a brand. You know what I mean? So, somebody might have something called Trust Zone, and someone else has some type of other trusted platform module, whatever, and these things will change over time, right? And what we specifically said when we were creating this standard is that we want it to be extensible into the future. And people will say, well, how do you know what the future is going to be? Like, well, we don't, but we have some inklings. Like, we know quantum is coming. We know augmented reality. We know, we could put more security probably into the network. So we created it with a view as to what's happening today. And then being an aerospace engineer, as I have a heads down display and a heads up display. There's like your altimeter and there's like, oh, there's a tornado over there, right? So we look at what could be and we try to make it so that it's a good base that can be extensible into the future. And the role model standard is 802, 802.11, the Wi-Fi standard, where it was created and then it's been forked and repeated and this and that, and it's gone in all these different directions. That's what we hope happens to TIPS.
What's a good measurement of success for you? Is it seeing OEMs adopt this and seeing it go mainstream, so to speak, or is it something else?
Yeah, I want it to be in the fabric of what we do in connected healthcare and eventually in all other domains too, like, the smart grid with, PLCs, programmable logic controllers and stuff, all the way down to the critical pieces of a system. And so we want to see deployment of it. I love that in our last task group meeting, we're still meeting once a month as a TIPS Roadmap task group. One of the people in the task group, gave us a link to a consulting firm that has a 2933 practice. We're like, yes, that means they're helping people figure out how to do this. So we want to see consulting practices around this. We want to see deployment of it. We want to create we've created we're a bunch of geeks. We created this very detailed maturity model. Now we're trying to figure out how to create a simple one like the HIMSS maturity model or like the smart grid maturity model, kind of like a pretty bar chart type of thing. And so we're looking to do that. And then we want people talking about it at the C-suite level, whether it's the CISO, the CIO, it could be higher depending on what's going on, because cybersecurity is an issue everywhere, as we know. And then, all the way down to the developers and the designers and the guys designing the chips and the devices and, everything. So we really want to see it, everyone be aware of it. We want it to become a part of the culture and so that people expect it.
So you mentioned that once the standard is published, there can't be any more work on it. So is it fair to say that you're in an advocacy phase now as well? Is that part of this mission, just to get the word out?
That's such a great way to say it. Yes, we are in an advocacy phase. And so we really encourage people to learn about it. They can buy the standard. I do a lot of presentations. They can look me up on, anywhere on the internet. I just did one last week. I'm going to be posting at a CIO Insight event up in Boston. Actually, I wasn't that far from you, probably. And I was talking about TIPS there. So we encourage them to learn about it and then think about how they should apply it. So what we expect is that device manufacturers should use it all the way from when they're designing the chip or the system or the device or the integrated solution or their software partners or their supply chain or whatever, their SBOM, all this stuff, that they think about that and have it at the design phase, in the development phase. And then what we are hearing from the CISOs at the hospitals that are part of our working group, we're so lucky. We have people that are experts in all parts of this ecosystem in Europe and the US, Asia, Africa, a number of places. And what the hospitals are saying is they want to be able to expect this from their vendors. So how are you, are you TIPS compliant? Where are you on the TIPS trust and identity mode? Where are you on the privacy mode in Ireland versus in the US? Where are you in the protection, safety, and security? And there are a lot of safety standards already in medical devices. They're very specific. So we more refer to those. On the privacy side, it's different in every jurisdiction. HIPAA is different from GDPR, is different from California, is different from Canada.
Right.
Everything's different. So we point them to those. But in the trust and the identity and the protection and security, that's pretty ubiquitous, what you need to worry about. And so we have experts in all those areas that helped to define the standard. And we talk about this tripod mode, which is people, organizations, and devices. So looking at how the people interact with the systems and where the risk is to them, how the organizations interact with the systems, how you register a medical device to the human, to the caregiver, to the doctor, to the manufacturer, to the hospital, to this, to that. And then the devices themselves, which would include the registry and device-to-device communication, and then kind of like the stack of the device and the integrated system and how that looks. So all of that is included in this. And we hope that people take this seriously, and they a device manufacturer, as an example, could look at it and they can do a self-assessment on tips, and then they might look at it and, like, if I were the CEO, I'd say, so how do we compare to our competitors? What are our competitors looking like,
Right.
right? And then, where's the most risk to us financially? God forbid something happens. So what should we be beefing up? Or, what are our new strategic plans to make this even better? Or what should we be most worried about? So we would like them to use this as kind of a metric themselves to see how they can improve. But we want everyone to feel like they can start where they are. I say it's like, if somebody who's in kindergarten, or someone who's 4 says, I want to be a doctor. And people say, you can't be a doctor, you're 4. And I would say, well, first you go to kindergarten, then you go to school, then you go to college, like
Baby steps.
yeah, exactly. There's a way to get there. So we want them to look at it and be able to figure out where they are and how they can improve.
So the TIPS model really speaks to me in terms of a lot of it is about access and access control. And, that's obviously a fundamental part of cybersecurity, but that's really the crux of the issue, is keeping unwanted access off of these devices. And then you can talk about protecting the data and so forth. Is that a fair assessment?
Yeah, it is. That's why trust and identity is the first 2 letters. It's the tip of the arrow,
Right.
the IAM space, identity nexus management. And then the security has to be baked in at every level. And I think one of the places we are now, and we've been in cybersecurity really the whole time. Like, remember when they were like, insider threat is the worst, and everyone's like, what? No way, can't be. They work for my company. We're like, okay, surprise, and so there are always these surprises in cybersecurity. A new attack vector, a new 0 day, a new this, a new that. Let's create a new device. Like, oh my gosh, what does that do? You got to be kidding me. And, did you bother securing that, connecting to that? So there are all these concerns. And so we really need to, try to keep on top of that. And so it is trust and identity as the tip of the arrow, and then all the other pieces that go along with it, which includes the governance and then the actual, what you're baking into the system.
Right.
So yeah, you're absolutely right.
The secure development part of this whole equation too. I mean, you're going to have vulnerabilities regardless of how locked down your development practices are. And if you're talking vulnerabilities, you're eventually going to have to patch them or mitigate in some way. In healthcare, it's really tough because of the FDA being kind of in the middle and the gatekeeper of any fixes to medical devices. How did you guys balance that? How did that come up at all when you were developing the standard? What were those discussions all about?
Yeah, so we had the FDA present to us, and people who were at the FDA who presented as individuals, because sometimes they have to do that because they can't represent the agency. And we actually, I had this gigantic poster that's like 36 by 72 inches that we used at an event where the FDA was, to talk about TIPS and actually bringing it into remote subject monitoring and clinical trials, like into specific areas of clinical IoT. And my IEEE friend and colleague, Maria Palombini, who's been our angel in the outfield on this whole TIPS journey, said that the FDA came over and said, this is exactly what we need. So I think that's really good. And, NIST has asked us to bring it across all the cyber physical systems. So they see the value in it. The thing that we've been starting to talk about is FDA recognition. I was presenting this along with one of the gentlemen in the working group who did a lot of work on the security part. And we spoke at the MetaSal organization. And one of the device manufacturers, medical device manufacturers in Italy, actually asked if we were on the FDA recognition path. And so luckily, one of the working group members used to work at the FDA. And so we've been talking to them about how to go down that path. And some people would like us to be recognized, be ISO as well, because that's more accepted, or people look at that more like in Europe and outside the US. And so we really want this to be as ubiquitous as possible. So we're starting to go down those paths. It was like when we said we want to do this with UL because, they have this like safety brand. So then we create an MOU between IEEE and UL. So we're going down these little paths and pushing these little noodles up all these hills, to try to help, help instantiate it every way we can. And every opportunity for us to talk about it like this, we really appreciate. And I really want to thank you for having me here. This is so great and asking such great questions.
Oh, thank you. Let's talk about kind of the problem itself. I mean, what, in your opinion and the working group's opinion, just what's the big issue with these devices to you? What worries you so much about them in terms of like, why are they so vulnerable to hackers? It seems like a difficult thing to target.
We address all problems as engineers. The hard problems just take longer. And I was an aerospace engineer. I was designing future missions around Jupiter many years ago. So hard problems aren't an issue for us. Those are the ones we like to address because we know other people aren't doing it. But, as we look at it, we wanted to make sure that we were, being as detailed as we could be and as realistic as we could be at the same time. So it's really been great.
And in talking about the problem and the safety of these devices, the security of these devices, how mindful are you as a group of not sensationalizing it in terms of like the hacking the pacemaker kind of discussion versus let's talk instead about emphasizing, not having huge delays in care or rerouting patients because of a hack or delays in accessing records? How important is it to have the right kind of discussion,
So
even in just general terms?
we have the real discussion. So when I present this, I talk about, the FDA recalling, over 200,000 pacemakers a few years ago. And what concerns me when I look at some of those numbers is that they're not cute little companies you haven't thought of before, you haven't heard of. It's not like someone that has no clue what they're doing. You know what I mean? Like they're brand new.
Right.
They're like, oh, what is that? Like, what is encryption? Like, how does that really work? Or how does that, and what do you have to worry about with FOTA? So the companies that have devices being recalled are companies we know and trust that have millions of devices out there. So if their stuff is being recalled, holy cow, right? So with all the new devices coming out, what do we do? So I always present that first. So let's see, is this a real problem or not? So the FDA originally, I think since 2008, has been identifying software vulnerabilities in medical devices, and hundreds of thousands or millions of devices have been recalled. And there have been voluntary recalls. It's like when people say I decided to retire, but it wasn't really voluntary. So, so
Right.
it's real. And so I think that's what hearkened me so much when I was like, holy cow, these are companies, these are the big people. These are the ones we all trust. And they say, well, so it was a vulnerability that, could be within 15 meters with a low skill level. So I'm envisioning, there's some kid in a hoodie in his mother's basement, that is figuring out how to hack this stuff. And I'll tell people, okay, so within 15 meters, wow, how many people are within 15 meters of you now? Do you trust all of them? Do you know you can trust all of them? Like in one day I was going to DEF CON and I was on a plane. I was sitting next to this guy. He goes, I'm going to DEF CON. I said, oh, that's great. He said, yeah, I have my pacemaker in. And I looked at him and I said, did you get the code to be able to turn it off when you walk into the biohacking village? I was like, and I actually texted one of my friends who is a senior technical fellow at Medtronic, and I'm like, how do I help this guy? I'm really worried. But he had to contact his doctor to get the code. Anyway, very long story, right? But it's very real. And so I talk about that right up front. Like, these are the recalls that have been done. I'm not saying the name of the company, but you can easily find it.
Yeah.
And so that's what really worried me. And I deal with some angel stuff, and I look at different VCs and stuff sometimes, and I see all these cute little things coming out, and I'm like, man, they might have no idea. So if the big people who've been around for decades or centuries probably decades, don't know it, then how are these people going to learn it? So it's a standard, and it's actually an education process too, right? So when people buy the standard, it's not a lot of money. They buy it because that's the way IEEE is their business model. When they look at the standard, they'll be like, oh, look at all this stuff. Like we have decommissioning in there too, right? Make sure you take all the data off it when you decommission it. They'll be like, oh, we're going to do great things. We're going to decommission this device, then we're going to send it to Africa or like to underprivileged area. Like, that's great. Did you get all the data off?
Right.
Well, I wouldn't have to worry about that. They don't know how to take it off. We're like, no, you can't look at it like that.
Right.
Right. And so we bring all those things up from inception to decommissioning.
Makes you wonder if we should have connected everything in the first place.
Well, that's okay, because we really can't, because we didn't have the everythings.
Right.
right? Because all the everythings are still coming out and the new everythings are going to be coming out. And so that's why we wanted to have a base standard that's extensible into the future, so we can envision and decide, well, what do we do when there's quantum tunneling, tunneling timer technology on this stuff? Do we need something new? And then we can look at what we need to do to fix it. So that was a great question, Michael. We get very real about it right away.
Yeah.
Because that's why, as I said at the beginning, we chose clinical IoT as our first TIPS focus area, because if you hack an implanted medical device, you can quickly kill a human. And actually, I have an interesting story on that. So I've been talking about TIPS like since 2015, probably. And a gentleman reached out to me who is an MD and an IEEE senior member. So he knows both sides. He's a doctor, plus he's a geek like us. And he wrote me, he said, "Oh, I saw your academic medical center, presentation on TIPS." I was like, "Oh, that's so wonderful." He said, "And so I actually quote you in my book, refer to you in my," I said, "Oh, I'm so honored. What's the name of your book?" "The Doctor Will Kill You Now."
Oh,
I was like,
that's cheery.
"No, you're kidding, right?" He's like, "I'll send you a copy." I'm like, "Oh, I don't know if I want to see this." So there I am. Like, I had the reference number memorized for a while, but I haven't looked at it in a while. And there it was, and it was a story about a kid with a hoodie in his mother's basement. And, he goes rogue. He fakes a PA license, which definitely should have been caught. So there was a process problem at the doctor's office. And anyway, he's a hacker. He goes into the hospital, and of course he turns off the power. And then of course a guy in an event dies. And then his next step is go to a children's hospital. So you get all, oh my gosh, no, it ends up okay, but not with the poor guy who died on the vent. Right. So it's very real. And when you see things like that, I couldn't believe he put me in the book. I'm like, man, I'm not putting that on my bio.
We don't have to give him a plug.
Well, I mean, he's a smart guy, and he's right. People should
Right.
worry about it.
Yeah.
That's part of what we do when we're geeks. Like you said, do you get real? We're like, yeah, we get real. That guy got real.
Mhm.
Right. And so it's when you can explain, how severe it could be. And then as we look at tips for other areas, like, water systems or the smart grid, and you can just watch, TV, and you can see them sensationalizing, potential hacks like this.
Yeah.
And they're doable, and that's why, we have to, what is that joke about, running away from a bear? You just have to run faster than the guy next to you.
That's right.
And so
Don't be the slowest guy.
Exactly. And so we have to keep running faster than the hackers.
Before we wrap up, I want to ask you about legacy systems, legacy technology. It's all over hospitals, as we know. Does the standard kind of can it be applicable to some of the stuff that's already there that may not be going anywhere?
Yeah.
At least for the time being.
Yeah, it is, because that's what I meant by it has to be real. They have to be able to start where they are. Like, you're 4 and you want to be a doctor. It's like, okay, I have all this Windows stuff. What do I do? And it's baked into the technology and I can't take it out and I can't upgrade it, or I can't use my, the device. So we do address that. And then we give them ideas on things they can do from a process perspective. And then they can create aspirational goals of what the risks are that they might have, and therefore where they want to invest to change. And so that's the idea with that. And so that's very real for anybody in healthcare. And we all know that,
Right.
And that's a good question. And so years ago, we used to call it brownfield and greenfield. Brownfield is the stuff that exists already, and greenfield is the brand new stuff that you bring in. And it has to address both. So it does. But as you said, it can't fix like, an old Windows problem where you can't get the thing out of the MRI device, whatever. I mean, they're baked together. You can't change that. But are there different process things you can do? Are there things you can do with network security that we haven't done yet? That's interesting, right? And so what I say is, if you're thinking about tips, like get, some type of board you can write on or whatever, and say, okay, where are all the attack vectors? Okay, now where are all the attack vectors we haven't thought about yet? And then like keep going, and then say, gosh, what do we do now? And so that's really identifying, respecting the problem, and then identifying where you want to focus.
Right.
And, and it's important for the ecosystem to work together. So like you're saying, there are some healthcare devices that, providers are using in hospital. And so those hospitals are saying, I want to use tips to create expectations with the manufacturers. And we have, some of the big names working with us that I won't mention that are very
Yeah.
interested in this. And we're excited.
That's pretty powerful, though.
Yeah, well, thank you. Yeah, it's really cool. And I'm just, this is my fault, as I say, because this was bothering me. But it's the entire working group working together, who's just incredible. Over 300 people, and they all bring different expertise, which is so cool. So we're very lucky, and we hope people deploy it. And we hope it has a
Yeah.
life forever, really. And that we get to keep making people, things, and devices and data safer.
All right. So one last question then for you. Take me into the next 6 months or 12 months. You mentioned earlier that you want to bring TIPS into other areas of cyber physical systems. Where do you imagine the most logical next step would be? What would it look like?
So that's a good question. So we've just approved, I'm also vice chair of the IEEE Engineering and Medicine Biology Society, and we're the ones that get to see these new standards requests coming in. And so they actually just approved 2 new PAR study groups. That's how we talk in IEEE. It's a project authorization request to create a new standard. And so they're going to study it and then come up with, this is what we think the standard would be. And we just approved 2 new ones. One is for AI-enabled coaching for TIPS in healthcare. Isn't that interesting? So, yeah,
Really?
and so that's one of them. And then the other one is TIPS for remote subject monitoring, including clinical trials and other remote subject monitoring aspects, like when people get chemo or whatever. A lot of people are going home with devices, or going elsewhere with devices, or traveling around the planet with devices. You want to be safe everywhere. And so those were the first 2. We also had IEEE has been sponsoring a TIPS webinar series for a couple of years. The first in 2021, it was all about cybersecurity for healthcare. Now we just did one on the smart grid in January of 2025, and we're planning one in precision agriculture. And we also want to look at connected vehicles. I actually presented TIPS for connected vehicles in December of 2019. Remember what happened right after that? In Berlin, and then everything stopped, So we look forward to picking that up again. TIPS for connected vehicles or autonomous vehicles. People, it's like beta and VHS. Everybody gets emotional about what you should call them, but they're connected to something. A lot of the new vehicles, right? So we're looking at that area, and actually data centers, and even working with some scientists working in high energy physics land, where they make devices that are very expensive. You think of, with everybody, different nation state things going on, and increased risk, increased interest in all sorts of data and access to things. We're talking about applying it to everything.
It is wild. I mean, like, every car is basically a computer with 4 wheels. I'm getting software updates all the time, and it's
that's
really
scary to me. Yeah.
Yeah.
When I first used to present this, I would show, you probably saw those hacks, like the Jeep hack and the Prius hack, where they're,
Sure.
So I would show those to make it real for people. And if they hadn't seen it before, they were like, I was like, yeah, son of a gun, huh? Yeah. So, in the first one, the guy was sitting in the back seat, because he had to connect physically to the CAN bus. But then the next video they did, he was remote. And they were like, what? I'm like, no, look, he's wearing a hoodie sitting on his mother's couch. Look at that.
Yeah, I happen to know the guy that was driving, and he's still a little freaked out by that story. These guys are running the brakes from God knows where while he's trying to drive.
Oh my gosh,
and,
right?
Wild
it was
times.
Terrible. And he went up this little hill or something. He went into the embankment. Oh my gosh,
he
terrible. Did. Yeah, everyone should be PTSD'd. So I make it very real very quickly, and that's what engineers tend to do. Like, we're like, we can be kind of clinical, and I think it's important so people understand how important it is to their lives. And when I present it to a broader group, I'll say, you can put this in any domain, but let's do healthcare, because that's everybody. This is your mother, your grandmother, your kids, you, everybody, connected healthcare. What are the risks? So everybody can identify with that. And then we go into the different domains. So yeah, we're looking forward to bring it into all those domains. And as, my friend at IEEE said, there could be hundreds of these TIPS standards. And that's really what we hope, is that people take this and make it real and make it valuable for their domain. Like I said, like a connected medical device is not exactly your PLC that you would find in a smart grid system, or a phaser multiplexer unit. Like, they're different. They're critical infrastructure. but they're different. And so we want to make sure that we have the right experts so that we're not just doing this arm waving, security thing, but we're actually looking at the particular issues. And all of these domains are changing, like distributed energy. Like it used to just be, we have all this stuff locked down. There's the grid. Now it's like, and then my car can give you power. My car can take power. Oh, my car can bring the power over there. It can connect to this. And then it's Wi-Fi. And it's getting photo updates. Oh my gosh, what? And so all these things are changing. And so, as I said, you look at where are all our attack vectors, and then where are the ones we haven't thought about yet, and where are the new ones? And that's the opportunity. So it's really an ongoing pursuit.
It just keeps us all employed, right?
God willing. Yeah, that's that's a great idea.
Yeah. All right, Florence, thank you so much for the time. I think this was a great discussion. I think people are really going to enjoy it.
Well, thank you. It's really been a pleasure. Thank you for all the great questions. And if anybody is interested, they can connect with me on LinkedIn. They can look up, the 2933 standard. There's a website at IEEE, and it has our email addresses. And, join the team. Anybody can join the T.I.P.S Roadmap Task Group. It's open to every human who cares.
All right, great stuff. Have a great day. Thank you so
too.
much.
Thank you.
Bye.